Look at a castle from the outside, and it feels obvious why people built them. Huge walls, tall towers, one narrow gate, a whole world locked behind stone. It looks like the perfect answer to violence. If danger comes, you close the gate. If an army arrives, you stand on the wall. If the world outside falls apart, the castle still stands there, heavy and calm, like the problem has already been solved. So why did that answer stop working? Why did something that looked so permanent become, in military terms, less and less important? The short version is not that stone suddenly became weak. Stone did not forget how to be stone. Walls did not simply stop being walls. The real answer is stranger. War changed the question. For centuries, a castle wall mostly had to answer one question: can you force the enemy to slow down? Later, artillery asked a different question: can you survive being hit again and again from far away? And that new question changed almost everything. But to understand why, we have to start with what a castle actually did. Because a castle was not just a building. It was not just a home for a lord. And it was not just a dramatic background for stories about knights. A castle was a machine for controlling time. Imagine an army walking through the countryside. It wants food. It wants land. It wants obedience. Maybe it wants to take a road, a bridge, a town, a river crossing, or the farms around it. If there is no stronghold in the way, that army can move quickly. It can arrive, threaten, burn, steal, and leave. Speed is power. But put a castle in that landscape, and everything changes. Now the army cannot simply walk into the important place. It has to stop. It has to decide what to do about the wall. And that decision is expensive. The attackers can try to climb. They can try to break the gate. They can try to starve the defenders. They can try to dig under the wall. They can try to build machines. But whatever they choose, the attack becomes slower. And slower means more dangerous. Every day, outside the castle, costs food. Every day gives defenders time to prepare. Every day gives allies time to arrive. Every day gives weather, disease, boredom, fear, and bad luck a chance to attack the attackers. That is the quiet genius of a castle. It does not have to destroy the enemy. It only has to make the enemy pay for moving forward. This is easy to miss, because when we look at castles today, we mostly see stone. We see towers and walls. We see beautiful ruins. We see tourist photos. But medieval people saw a problem. If you wanted the land behind the wall, you first had to deal with the wall. And dealing with the wall was never simple. Start with the ladder. A ladder sounds almost childish. Just lean it against the wall and climb. But in a real siege, that ladder is a terrifying object. It has to be carried across open ground. It has to be placed while people above you are watching. It has to hold your weight, and even if it works, it turns an army into a line of men climbing one at a time. That is a terrible way to enter a defended place. The first man up the ladder meets the entire wall alone. The second man is trapped below him. The people above can push, throw, shoot, stab, drop stones, or simply knock the ladder away. The wall turns numbers into a bottleneck. An army might be huge, but the top of a ladder is tiny. That is what defense does. It makes the attacker fight through a narrow point. The gate was another narrow point. A castle gate looks like an entrance, but in war, an entrance is also a trap. The gate is where defenders expect the enemy to come, so the gate is protected. It may have a ditch in front of it. It may have a bridge. It may have towers beside it. It may have heavy doors, iron parts, murder holes, or a second barrier behind the first. The gate says, yes, this is the way in. And that is exactly why it is dangerous. The attacker knows where the entrance is. The defender knows that the attacker knows. So the gate becomes a place where the whole castle focuses its violence. Then there are towers. Towers are not just decoration. They change what defenders can see. They let people look farther. They let defenders shoot down or across. They make blind spots smaller. They turn the wall from a flat barrier into a system of angles. That matters because a castle is not only stopping movement, it is organizing attention. It lets a smaller group watch a larger space. It lets defenders notice danger before danger reaches the gate. And again, that buys time. Then there is the most boring part of siege warfare, which is also one of the most important: waiting. Sometimes attackers did not storm a castle at all. They waited outside and tried to starve it. That sounds easier, until you remember that the attackers also have to eat. An army is not just soldiers. It is mouths. It is animals. It is wagon. It is tools. It is people who get sick. It is people who want to go home. An army that sits still becomes a problem for itself. It consumes the land around it. It needs supply lines. It needs discipline. It needs money. And if it waits too long, the siege can become more dangerous for the attackers than for the defenders. This is why castles shaped power for so long. They made violence slow, and in a world where communication was slow, roads were difficult, and large armies were hard to feed, slowing violence could be enough. A castle did not have to be invincible. It only had to be costly. It only had to make an attack take longer than the attacker could afford. That is why castles controlled landscapes. They protected roads. They guarded bridges. They watched valleys. They stored food. They gave rulers a place to retreat. They made authority physical. If a lord had a castle, his power was not just an idea. It was a stone fact on a hill. People could see it from far away. The castle said, "This land has an owner. This road has a watcher. This gate has a price." And for centuries, that logic worked. But then the problem changed. Not suddenly, not everywhere at once. Not like one invention appeared, and every castle became useless the next morning. History almost never works that cleanly. The change was slower, messier, uneven, and that is part of what makes it interesting. Gunpowder weapons appeared awkwardly. Early cannons were heavy. They were expensive. They were difficult to move. They could be dangerous to their own crews. They were not instantly perfect machines. For a long time, older weapons and older methods still mattered. People did not see the first cannon and immediately understand the future. They saw a loud, smoky, unreliable tool. But inside that tool was a new kind of question. Before artillery, a wall mostly punished people who came close. Climb the wall, and you are exposed. Attack the gate, and you enter the trap. Dig near the foundations, and defenders may find you. Move a siege tower forward, and everyone can see it. The castle's strength was partly that it forced the attacker into danger. It pulled the enemy toward the wall. Gunpowder artillery changed that relationship. Now an attacker could stand farther away. Not safely, exactly, but farther. Far enough that the wall was no longer only a barrier. It became a target. That is the key shift. A wall that once forced the enemy to approach could now be attacked from a distance. And distance changes the whole emotional shape of war. If you have to climb a ladder, the wall is above you. If you fire a cannon, the wall is in front of you. That difference matters. One is a direct physical confrontation. The other is repeated pressure. Again and again, shot after shot, day after day. One cannonball might do little. 10 might scar the surface. Hundreds might loosen stones, break mortar, open cracks, and turn a strong wall into a weak point. And once a weak point appears, the whole siege can focus on it. That is what older castles were not built for. They were built to resist people. They were built to make climbing dangerous. They were built to make gates hard, to force. They were built to see trouble coming, but they were not designed to be punched in the same place by heavy iron balls for days. Just a quick reminder, if you are enjoying this so far, feel free to subscribe for more, and leave a like, so we know to keep making these. The strange part is that a cannon did not need to erase the whole castle. It did not need to flatten every tower. It did not need to destroy every wall. It only needed to make one useful opening. Because a wall is not powerful just because it is stone, a wall is powerful because it separates inside from outside. That separation is the whole point. The defenders are inside. The attackers are outside. The gate controls movement between the two. The wall makes the difference real. But a breach changes that. A crack becomes a hole. A hole becomes a passage. A passage becomes a place where soldiers can enter. And once soldiers can enter through the wall has lost the job it was built for. It may still stand. It may still look impressive. But militarily, the logic has changed. This is why the story is not that castles became weak. It is that their main advantage became less reliable. The tall wall was brilliant when the enemy had to climb it. Height made ladders harder. Height gave defenders better sight. Height made the castle visible and intimidating. But against artillery, height could become a weakness. A tall wall gives a cannon a clear target. It rises above the landscape. It catches impact. And if it is built as a high, relatively thin vertical surface, it may not handle repeated impact well. So military architecture began to change. Walls became lower. They became thicker. Defenses spread outward. Angles mattered more. Earth absorbed impact better than proud vertical stone. The old castle did not vanish from the world. But the best answer to artillery no longer looked like the classic castle in our imagination. This is one of the most important transitions in the whole story. Defense did not disappear. Walls did not disappear. Fortified places did not disappear. They changed shape. Instead of trusting only in height, later fortifications often cared more about thickness, angles, ditches, earth, and layered space. The goal was no longer simply to rise above the attacker. The goal was to absorb impact, hide weak points, control lines of fire, and make every approach dangerous. In other words, the answer to artillery was not stop building defenses. The answer was build a different kind of defense. That detail matters because it keeps us from telling the story too simply. If someone says cannons made castles useless, it sounds like one technology deleted one building. But what really happened was more like a redesign of the battlefield. Old castles belonged to one defensive logic. New fortifications belonged to another. The classic castle wanted to dominate the landscape vertically. The newer military logic wanted to survive pressure horizontally. It cared about approach routes. It cared about where guns could be placed. It cared about what angle a wall presented to incoming fire. It cared about how long defenders could keep fighting after the first damage appeared. That is a very different mindset. The castle was not just losing to a weapon, it was losing to a new way of thinking about space. This is important because when people ask why castles became useless, the answer is not simply cannon. Cannons mattered enormously, but a cannon is only one part of the machine. To make artillery decisive, you also need people who can build it. You need metal. You need powder. You need transport. You need animals and roads. You need engineers. You need crews who know what they are doing. You need money. And above all, you need the ability to keep doing it. A single cannon is a weapon. A state that can move cannons, feed armies, pay specialists, replace losses, and keep firing is a different kind of power. This is why the fall of the castle is also a story about the rise of the state. Because a castle is local, it belongs to a place. It watches a road, a valley, a bridge, a town, or a border. Its power is concentrated. You can point at it. You can walk around it. You can see where it begins and ends. But the new kind of military power was harder to see in one object. It lived in tax records. It lived in supply chains. It lived in workshops. It lived in roads. It lived in people who knew how to cast metal, mix powder, repair wheels, dig trenches, measure distance, and keep accounts. That kind of power is less dramatic than a tower, but it can be more dangerous. Because a tower is strong in one place, a system can return again and again. If one gun breaks, another can be brought. If one crew fails, another can be paid. If one shipment runs out, another can be organized. And if a wall is damaged, the system can keep pressing on the same weak point. This is not as visually romantic as a knight riding toward a castle gate, but it is closer to how power was changing. The old world did not end because people suddenly became smarter. It changed because the machinery around war became larger. More money, more paperwork, more specialists, more transport, more coordination, more ability to turn distance into pressure. This is where the castle's problem becomes bigger than stone. Medieval power was often local. A lord controlled a region. A castle anchored that control. It made local authority hard to remove. But over time, larger states became better at collecting taxes and organizing war. They could gather more resources. They could pay for specialized equipment. They could support larger armies. They could keep campaigns going longer. And when war becomes a contest of systems, a single castle is less decisive. The question is no longer only, can this wall stop these men today? The question becomes, can this fortress survive the resources of an organized state? That is a much harder question, because the attacker is no longer only a group of men with ladders. The attacker is money. The attacker is supply. The attacker is engineering. The attacker is gunpowder production. The attacker is roads and wagons and contracts and taxes. The attacker is time being used against the wall. Earlier, the castle used time against the attacker. Wait outside long enough, and the army suffers. But artillery began to reverse that. Now every day of firing could make the wall worse. Every repair could be hit again. Every visible weakness could become the focus of the siege. Time no longer only protected the castle, time could consume it. That is the deeper shift. The castle was a machine for buying time. Artillery and organized states became machines for spending time against the castle. And when that happened, the old logic started to break. Still, castles did not simply disappear. That is one of the biggest clues that the simple version of the story is wrong. If castles had become instantly useless, people would have abandoned them immediately. But they did not. Many were repaired, some were strengthened, some were updated, some became part of newer defenses. Some still mattered in places where artillery was limited, money was short, or warfare moved differently. Some remained useful because not every enemy had the same tools. Some remained useful because local conflict was not the same as a major royal campaign. Some remained useful because controlling a road, a storehouse, or a town still mattered. History is not a switch. It is a long argument between old solutions and new problems. And for a long time, castles remained part of that argument, but their meaning changed. Some castles became residences, some became administrative centers, some became prisons, some became symbols of noble power, some became landmarks, some became romantic ruins. The building could survive even after the military logic weakened. That is why castles can confuse us today. They still look powerful. They still look permanent. They still dominate the landscape. A ruined tower on a hill can still feel stronger than almost anything around it. But what we are seeing is not the same as what a medieval attacker saw. We see history. They saw a practical problem. We see a dramatic silhouette. They saw a gate that might kill them. We see stone beauty. They saw time, hunger, fear, and cost. And later, artillery crews saw something else again. They saw a target. That is the whole story in one change of perspective. To a medieval attacker, the castle says, "Come closer, if you dare." To artillery, the castle says, "Stand back and keep hitting the same place." Those are two different worlds. And the castle was designed for the first one. This is why the decline of castles is not really a story about one invention defeating one building. It is a story about a defensive idea losing its central position. The defensive idea was, make the enemy come close, make the enemy slow down, make the enemy pay for every step. The new offensive idea was, bring enough firepower, enough money, enough organization, and enough time to make the wall fail before you have to climb it. Once that became possible, the classic castle was no longer the obvious answer. It could still be useful. It could still intimidate. It could still shelter people. It could still be modified. But it was no longer the final word in power. The world around it had changed. And when the world changes, even strong things can become the wrong shape. Think about that for a second. A castle is not weak. It is massively strong. But strength only matters if it matches the problem. A sword is strong in a sword fight. A locked door is strong against someone trying the handle. A wall is strong against people who must climb it. But when the problem changes, the same strength can become less important. That is what happened to castles. They were not made irrelevant because people stopped respecting them. They were made less decisive because the battlefield stopped asking the question they were best at answering. The old question was, can you stop people from getting in? The new question was, can you survive a system that can keep attacking from a distance? And that question belonged to a different age. An age of artillery. An age of large estates. An age of organized money. An age where war was less and less about one wall, one lord, and one local stronghold. So when people say castles became useless, the better answer is they became less decisive. They stopped being the center of military logic. They moved from the heart of war to the edge of it. Some still mattered. Some adapted. Some became symbols. But the old promise had been broken. Build a high wall, and the enemy must come close. That promise no longer held in the same way. Because the enemy could bring the wall a new kind of question. Not, how do we climb this? But, how long until it cracks? And, once that is the question, the castle is already living in a different world. So castles did not become useless, because stone suddenly became weak. They became less decisive because war changed the question. The wall was still impressive. It just was not the answer anymore. If you enjoyed this video, check out more of our videos, or watch the video YouTube thinks you might like next.